morning and welcome to Rising. As always, we have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Jessica Burbank. And last night, President Biden walked into the Capitol and actually seemed to be quite enjoying himself.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
This was, of course, for Thursday night's State of the Union address, and this is what it sounded like when he started to give that speech.
If I were smart, I'd go home now. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans, in January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation, and he said, I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world. Tonight, I come to this same chamber to address the nation.
The State of the Union is strong, says President Joe Biden, and the president came out swinging.
Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote.
And he managed to never mention the former president's name. He did invoke GOP legend Ronald Reagan.
Wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Some might have said a risky move now that Biden's age is in the spotlight, and Reagan was known to have had dementia during his final years in the Oval Office. There was a brief slip or two.
I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but if you want to get an Air Force One and fly to Toronto, Berlin, Moscow, even Moscow, probably. And bring your prescription with you, and I promise you I'll get it for you for 40% the cost you're paying now.
He certainly meant Mexico, but he did recover there. The galley was boisterous.
I'm told my predecessor called members of Congress and the Senate to demand they block the bill. He feels political win. He viewed it as a political win for me and a political loser for him. It's not about him. It's not about me. I'd be a winner. Not really. Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand.
There was even Marjorie Taylor Greene showing her support for the sure-to-be GOP candidate. President Joe Biden taunted and teased the GOP lawmakers and did his best to score some political points.
And in the end, President Joe Biden showed up and gave as much of a campaign speech, taking swipes at former President Trump.
4 years ago next week, before I came to office, the country was hit by the worst pandemic and the worst economic crisis in a century. Remember the fear, record losses. Remember the spikes in crime and the murder rate, raging virus that took more than 1 million American lives, of loved ones, millions left behind. A mental health crisis of isolation and loneliness. A president, my predecessor, failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. I think that's unforgivable.
He also stared down the Supreme Court justices, looking them straight in their eyes as he chastised their ruling overturning Roe v. Wade.
It's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that.
I think it's fair to say that this was not just a State of the Union speech. It was the president kicking off his 2024 campaign in earnest.
And you were there, Amber, at the Capitol. Why don't you paint the picture for what it was like?
It was a weird time last night. So I didn't make it into the press gallery, but I was in the Capitol building during the speech and around the area beforehand. And it was a lot different than the speech I attended last year and even the ones during the Trump administration. First of all, the security was incredibly tight. It honestly reminded me of what it was like being in downtown D.C. in the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol riot. There were fences blocks beyond the Capitol building, tons and tons of police officers, lines of ambulances down the street. It was pretty insane. It took me actually 35 minutes, if people know the geography of D.C., to walk from the Hall of the States over to the Cannon House building. And then inside, you could see some of this during these clips that we played, but it was pretty rowdy. And it was also a very partisan, I think I would describe it as divisive kind of speech. I mean, typically the State of the Unions are considered pretty boring because they're so dissimilar from a campaign speech. Usually you're trying to cover issues that are pretty bipartisan. You're trying to get applause lines from both parties. And in this case, pretty much every issue that Biden brought up, he included some kind of jab at Republicans or at Trump, who he kept referring to as his predecessor. And so it just felt different than State of the Unions that I've heard in the past. And even afterward, a lot of the lawmakers who were there when they came through Statuary Hall, where there's a media row after the speech ends, didn't really even stop and talk to the press. They just kind of marched out and went on their way. So it was a little weird. I don't know. What did you think about it, Jessica?
Well, I got really caught up in the GOP response. It was delivered by Senator Britt from, the South. She, I believe, took the place of someone who had retired, and that's how she got into office. She's young. She took her place in the Senate at just 40 years old. She's a mom, and she definitely doesn't have a lot of speaking experience, and that became very clear. It kind of became a meme on Twitter immediately afterwards. I'm perplexed at how they found someone who was a worse speaker than an 80-year-old. It could have been a very simple task, but it was giving animatron. It was Uncanny Valley, almost AI generated the motions in her face. I think she was probably very nervous. I did comment that I think the puppeteer of Yoda did a better job emulating a living being than her mannerisms. And the way she spoke, her cadence, was very ASPCA Arms of the Angel commercial, and it distracted from a lot of what she was saying in her speech. It was very immigration focused, but I was just so distracted by the delivery.
Yeah, I actually agree. It was a huge missed opportunity for her. I mean, obviously, giving whoever you give the SOTU response to is a sign of who you want to elevate to the leadership in your party, who you think might be a rising leader. Katie Britt definitely fits that bill. As you said, she's from Alabama. She's a young mom, one of the youngest people in the Senate, if not the youngest, and definitely seems to have a future in the GOP. But she squandered the opportunity with this weird sort of faux emotion that she placed over the things that she was saying. And as you said, she distracted from the message. I thought that whoever her staff was that she was preparing with probably should have told her to just speak normally and read normally, because I've seen her give speeches before. I've seen her talk off camera, and she's actually perfectly compelling. She's usually quite capable, and I don't know what happened. If just the largeness of the moment, the grandness of the moment got to her, and she got really nervous and just kind of slipped into this weird cadence, as you said. But I agree. It was unfortunate for the GOP to have that.
Right. And the State of the Union itself, I mean, there were so many people that I almost think that there is a standard script or set of responses that's circulated among friends of the Democratic Party of how to react and what to say, because there was so much of the same joke by so many people that are just establishment shills at this point, saying, oh, I want what he's on. Like, what's Biden taking? He's so fiery. When he was slurring like every sentence, I just think that they're trying to push a message for the people who didn't tune into the State of the Union. So, not the political pundits, but the people that will hear about it just from that message on Twitter, which I think is a silly strategy. I think it was good that, he did seem strong on a few policy points, but he also said who was it? It was Laken Riley was murdered by an illegal. How many hundreds of thousands of people are murdered by illegals? Was he trying to do an impersonation of someone on the GOP? Is that his actual opinion on undocumented immigrants? It was very weird. It seemed like someone threw a pin at him. But that moment, I think, showed what happens when Biden goes off script. I think the Moscow comeback was really clever, but there were also some comments that perhaps whatever he was on, it wore off by that point.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi apparently was not happy about him going off script and talking about illegal immigrants and Laken Riley, who I think he called Lincoln, which was just odd. She was not happy. I mean, similar to you, that he didn't say undocumented instead of illegal. It definitely seemed like it was almost like the real Biden peeking through for a moment. And the spin on how supposedly energetic he was really something else. I mean, the guy was yelling basically for an hour straight and somehow yelling and slurring at the same time. I mean, this was basically the Super Bowl for whoever gives Biden his meds. So I guess they did a good enough job that he was able to actually make it through the speech. I know some people were questionable that he wasn't able to, that he would be able to do that. But I was reading through the transcript last night and I noticed that there were exclamation points at the end of almost every line. So maybe that's just how Joe Biden reads emphasis into a line and reads exclamation points, is he just literally screams into the microphone. We have so much more to get to on State of the Union. We're going to cover immigration, his comments about Israel, Gaza, and much more. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back with more Rising after this.